In this video, I want to tell you why I love this book so very, very much. And this book is Rousseau's Confessions. It is his autobiography. Rousseau was born in 1712 and was possibly one of the greatest philosophers to have ever lived. He wrote classics like The Social Contract and Emile, a book on education. The first reason why I love this book is that it is a rollicking good read. It is a riveting narrative. Rousseau is born in Geneva. He's the son of a watchmaker and an upper-class lady, although unfortunately his mother dies 9 days after giving birth to him. And so the family have to move from their upper-class neighborhood into a working-class neighborhood, and Rousseau grows up around tradespeople at first. And throughout the book, we experience the full breadth of the class system in 18th century Europe. It's fascinating to see Rousseau moving between these different stratas of society. When Rousseau becomes a teenager, he goes to work as an apprentice to an engraver. And this is a fantastic fact about his life, because who would have thought that a great philosopher would start out as an apprentice to an engraver? It is anything but a conventional scholastic upbringing. Sadly, the engraver beats Rousseau so badly that he ends up fleeing from Geneva, and he runs away and finds shelter with a priest who then introduces him to Madame de Warrens, who becomes his protectress, and he considers her a mother. He calls her maman, but she also becomes his lover, rather confusingly, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Rousseau then goes to work as a tutor in Lyon to some aristocratic children. He also becomes the secretary to the French ambassador to Venice, before traveling to Paris. In Paris, he becomes friends with Diderot, and he writes numerous articles for Diderot's encyclopedia, and is also a friend of Condillac. So we are really getting to meet the luminaries of the 18th century through Rousseau's narrative of his own life. While in Paris, Rousseau also writes and composes an opera called Le Devin du Village, or The Village Soothsayer. Again, this is a fascinating feature of Rousseau's life, because what he was most well known for was writing this opera. It was one of the king's favorite operas, for example. But Rousseau begins to suffer from religious persecution on account of the unorthodox views that he expresses in his philosophical works. And so he flees to Geneva, but finds himself being kicked out and running from town to town. At the invitation of David Hume, Rousseau travels to England, where he spends time with Hume and travels around the country a little. He ends his life in Paris working as a copyist, copying musical scores. So yes, the first reason to read this book is that it just gives us a pan-European, riveting account of what it is like to be a writer at that time. And because of the religious persecution, Rousseau doesn't know who his friends and who his enemies are. He's having to run from place to place, and the book reads like a detective novel. The second reason why this book is such a fantastic read is that it has such a juicy backstory. Rousseau was being slandered and numerous allegations were being made against him, and he really wanted to set the record straight with this book, and this is why it is a real work of authenticity. He wants us to give him a fair trial, and so he's going to present all of his crimes and misdemeanors, but also all of the great things that he's done as well. This creates an incredibly unique experience to hear someone telling us everything about their life, and Rousseau seems to appreciate this. As he states in the first line of his Confessions, "I am resolved on an undertaking that has no model and will have no imitator. I want to show my fellow men a man in all the truth of nature, and this man is to be myself." So we are getting to really see a true human. This was special even in Rousseau's day, because of course you just have to imagine the kind of people that he was living around with their kind of white makeup and their powdered wigs to get an impression for just how rife narcissism and dissimulation were. And this is no less true today, where people live through digital avatars, through their idealized profiles that they sculpt on Instagram or Facebook. It can be incredibly hard to get an impression for what a true human being is. Another reason why this book is so fantastic is that it's a participatory experience. Rousseau invites us to judge him. He invites us to enter into a dialogue with him and conversation. And he dares us at the end of the book to state, "I was better than that man." So he really wants us to engage with him as another human being. Now, why is what Rousseau achieved so difficult? Well, in short, because none of us want to reveal embarrassing things about ourselves. We try to conceal our faults and our weaknesses, our foibles. Rousseau, however, dives headlong into this task. And this is why the book is also such a fascinating read, because Rousseau tells us things that are seriously shocking. So, for example, when he's living in Venice, he tells us of how he and a friend basically buy a girl in order for her to live as a live-in prostitute. As Rousseau himself writes, after much searching, he, i.e. Rousseau's friend, came up with a little girl of 11 or 12 years old, whose unworthy mother was willing to sell her. But what is really bizarre about this is Rousseau sees this episode as more evidence of his virtue than his vice. He tells us how, while they're waiting for the girl to come of age, he teaches her singing and ends up feeling paternal feelings towards her that mean that he can't do anything sexual or salacious with her. This, he thinks, shows that he is a good man deep down. And another sexually bizarre feature of Rousseau's life is that he tells us he used to have a fetish for exposing himself or flashing, and he did this to numerous washerwomen when he was a teenager, and in fact almost gets caught doing so. The next shocking thing is that he tells us that he has given up 5 of his children to the almshouse. Now, this allegation was already going around, and he wanted to defend himself against it. One of the reasons this allegation is so shocking is because he wrote this book called Emile, which deals with education, how to raise your children. But how can he tell people how to raise their children when he has given his children up to the almshouse? Now, he tells us that the reason he gave his children up to the almshouse was because he was concerned for their education. He thought that being children of a seamstress and a philosopher, they would have a poor upbringing, they would have a poor education, and that they would be much better off in the almshouse. However, this is blatant self-deception, because Rousseau would have known that infant mortality rates were incredibly high in the almshouses, and in all likelihood, all of his children would have died there. Another morally egregious event in Rousseau's life is when he steals a ribbon from Madame de Warren's house, and he blames this on a maid. He knows the maid is going to end up on the street if she is sacked because she won't be able to get a reference, and she'll end up destitute. He also knows that if he's caught, it's going to be of relatively little consequence. And yet, nonetheless, he lies anyway, and he adamantly lies, and she is indeed sacked. Rousseau thinks that this is one of his worst crimes, which is somewhat surprising when we think about him buying the 11 or 12-year-old girl in Venice or giving up his children to the almshouse. Rousseau also confesses things that are more morally ambiguous, for example, like the time he spends with a prostitute in Venice, which he tells us about in great detail, and his relationship with Madame de Warren's, which is absolutely bizarre. So when she takes him into her home, he initially sees her as a maternal figure and calls her maman or mama. However, she ends up sleeping with him because she thinks it's best that she introduces him to the world of carnal pleasures. And so he ends up in this very confusing relationship with Madame de Warren's, who is also sleeping with her steward. So it ends up being a ménage à trois. This is a traumatic experience for Rousseau, and he tells us so much in great heartbreaking detail. Rousseau also tells us about his mental and physical infirmities or weaknesses. So we hear at great length about his urinary tract infection, which is chronic and debilitating. Rousseau has to undergo painful procedures to treat this condition and also perform very uncomfortable procedures on himself. And he reveals how this leaves him unable to sexually perform and ultimately has serious consequences for his relationship with his wife, Thérèse Levasseur. On the mental side, Rousseau tells us just how deeply he struggles to write. Speaking of his manuscripts, he writes, "There is not one of them that I have not had to copy out 4 or 5 times before giving it to the printer. Seated at my table with my pen in my hand and my paper in front of me, I have never been able to achieve anything." What is more, Rousseau confesses to having no verbal memory. As he puts it, "I am totally bereft of verbal memory and have never in my life managed to learn 6 lines of verse by heart." This is touching because obviously for anyone in Rousseau's position, the temptation would be to mythologize oneself. And this is exactly what people like Michelangelo or Francis Bacon did. They destroyed any of their working sketches in order to create this illusion of themselves as creating ex nihilo, as kind of divinely inspired creatures. But Rousseau, in essence, democratizes genius by telling us you don't have to have an amazing memory or be a fluent writer in order to achieve the things he's achieved. What you need is grit and determination. This either raises the reader up to his level or he lowers himself to the reader's level. And in this sense, we really feel a sense of sympathy with Rousseau, and we feel as though we are with another fellow human being. Finally, Rousseau talks about his social ineptitude. He thinks that he is completely lacking in wit. As he puts it in his own words, "When I force myself to talk to the people I meet, I infallibly commit some blunder. When I say nothing, I am accused of being a misanthropist, a wild beast, a bear. It would have been much better for me if I'd been a total imbecile." The image of Rousseau that we're left with is the image of a man who is awkward and isolated and struggles to produce his work. And I like to think this can make all of us feel much better about the struggles that we have to face on a day-to-day basis. So I love this book because it is as close as we're going to get to an authentic portrait of a human being. But what is also fascinating is that Rousseau ultimately fails, because when we hear about him giving up his children to the almshouse or buying the 11 or 12-year-old girl, Rousseau is constantly deceiving himself, no matter how hard he tries to give an honest account of why he's doing what he's doing and what he's done. He distorts events in his favor. Nonetheless, Rousseau gets closer to the ideal of authenticity than any of us could ever hope. This is why it is such a rare treat, and I recommend you go and read Rousseau's Confessions if you haven't already. The Oxford translation is absolutely fantastic, and online you can find a host of other translations or read the text in the original French. This was one of the first videos on my new YouTube channel, Gateway Philosophy, so please like and subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.